Back to the Future was a movie that came out when I was 10 years old, the first one. And it was one of the best movies of all time, obviously. But also, it's perfectly fitting for what Michael's referring to, is that the longer you wait, the more history repeats itself. So I've been through the wheel of reinvention of web technologies at least 5 or 6 times. And it's kind of been a fun story. Now, if you scan this QR code, you can scan it now or at the end of the talk. There's going to be a 6-question quiz about this talk and about Back to the Future. And there's a prize, which fittingly is a little thing with a whole bunch of retro arcade games on it from the 80s, like 152 8-bit games in this little box. So that is the prize if you win the quiz. The quiz is based on accuracy and time. So we'll do that at the end of the talk. I'll give you little hints along the way, so just pay attention. So, who am I? Well, this is like 25 years of stuff. Actually, probably like 27 years. In 96, I wrote my first line of JavaScript code. In 2000, I started a rich text editor project in a browser, morphed into a consulting company, started the first widely adopted JavaScript framework called Dojo in 2004. In 2009, it was used by roughly 80% of the Fortune 500. Many of you may have never heard of Dojo because it was very important for the time when IE 6 through 8 mattered, and then it ended its life after that pretty much. So people still use it and it still somehow exists on 1% of the public internet, which is crazy to me. Apple at one point used it about 4 years later than they should have, which was always entertaining to me. In 2013, I started using TypeScript, so I was a very early adopter of that as well. Mostly because JavaScript misses interfaces, not because I like types, but I miss interfaces where you can describe the interoperability between code. But in about 2015, I found myself becoming more strategic. I started Halfstack in 2015, but I was becoming more of a manager, and I was spending less time writing code, and I would just like do code, and like I'd sneak code in when I could because I was too important to write code, right? And by 2019, I was like, what am I doing? I'm not writing any code at all that matters. And so in 2020, I sold my old company. I started living spec, and I started using React, which was kind of funny because React was like not the framework I created. And in 2003, I swore I would never touch rich text editing in a browser again. And in 2021, I found out myself as the accidental maintainer of one of the most popular rich text editors known as Slate. So even if you swear something off, 18 years later, you might end up being in charge of it again. So that's just kind of how the world works sometimes. So why is that interesting? Well, the first question is 2015. What's interesting about that year? That'll be on the quiz, so you can come think about that later. Then I like all the stuff. So this talk really just has a bunch of Back to the Future images and random thoughts that I might expand on or not. I don't rehearse talks. I just kind of stand up and talk about what moves me in the moment. And it's also kind of based on what I've heard today and what seems interesting. So I've often heard people say, like, you know, you go from that junior developer to the senior developer to the manager, right? And the manager is somehow a more important role. But honestly, it's not always, right? It depends, like Michael said. But sometimes you're told that you're too valuable, or you're too rusty, or you're too distracted, or when you're older, you can't possibly be as efficient as you are when you're younger and you don't have a life, which I think is pure BS. And this is like the Michael J. Fox saying everything's heavy. Oh, it's just heavy. Like development's heavy. And as you get older, you can't handle the weight of all of it. But, you know, so I was working on this startup with my friend, and I was going to handle the business side, you know, and that was like this heavy part of the business. So I'm in charge of like raising money and talking to investors and talking about the product and getting users and all that stuff. But I was like, but shit, like there's all these features that aren't getting done fast enough, and I could just hack on this a little bit and I could make something happen. And so I started doing that. And so I just got frustrated. I get impatient. I am not the epitome of work-life balance. I probably have averaged 5 hours of sleep a night since I was about 5 years old. So I'm just really extreme. And I pretty much work a little bit every day because I really enjoy what I do. And there's like no shame in that. But like for me, like when I was on my honeymoon, like my wife was sleeping, you know, and I was like coding because that's what I do, right? But because I needed like half as much sleep, so I might as well do something with that time. But I get frustrated when I see something I know I could fix this, right? And even though I hadn't really written any React code at all, I'm like, okay, I've got to be able to fix these little things. And so while it had been a while, a lot of skills don't fade away. This is the famous picture of Marty McFly's, you know, family fading away as he messes up the past before he fixes it. And so you think, well, I don't know React, or I don't know the latest framework, or I don't know how this works. But you realize you actually know everything that's important. All the concepts are roughly the same. It's just a different iteration or a different generation of things. And I'm also really good at breaking things, which means I'm really good at fixing them. So like one of my hobbies is actually teach yoga. And the reason I'm a good yoga instructor is because I've hurt every part of my body. So I know how to fix them, right? So if I like had never broken everything I'd ever touched that was electronic, I wouldn't know how to like have these problem solving skills to fix things. So it's kind of my strength is I break stuff and I fix it. And how do you build those instincts? A lot of times it's just over time and persistence and like just stepping back and looking at the data is a good way to sort of know how something works, right? And so really peeling back the layers of an onion and assuming you don't know anything is the best way to problem solve in my experience. And so that's still true today. So question number 2 will have something to do with number 88. I'll just give you that clue right now. And then, so, how did I get good at JavaScript debugging? Well, before like 2002, there were no consoles, there was no debugger, there was no like network analysis tool. You pretty much wrote window.alert and you would get something out of it, right? So there was really strange bugs. There's this bug in Netscape 4. I think I found someone's description of it, but it's not. So question 3, JavaScript browser console. That's a hint. So there was this bug in Netscape 4 where what you would do in Netscape 4 is you would document.write like dynamic styles or dynamic scripts. But if you wrote a long enough block, suddenly you just randomly see HTML on the page instead of the content you wrote. And the solution, of course, was to split up the word script into separate strings, which makes no sense at all. But that was like the answer to solve this parsing problem in early versions of Netscape. So another thing that happens a lot is taste, right? So what makes you a good engineer is often finding the same taste as the people you're working with, right? So it depends again, right? So for your team, what technology options are going to work best? Can you align on a sense of taste where if you do something this way, it's not going to offend your teammates or cause massive conflict? It's like, how do you fit in? Well, you agree on a particular style. How much testing do we do? Do we use TypeScript? Like, why do we do these things? And finding a shared taste is an often difficult thing to do. And I describe it as whether you can be a chameleon or a bull, right? And so a chameleon fits in, right? A chameleon observes the environment around them and figures out where to push and where to blend in. And the idea is you push in the areas your team wants you to push on, but not everything needs to be a battle or a fight. So for most things, you want to fit in. You want to be part of the team. You want to like not cause unnecessary conflict for things that don't matter. So yeah, like Dojo was always spaces. I would say always tabs and not spaces, right? But we have like tools like Prettier that deal with that for you. So who cares, right? So you could fight the battle of, well, you should do tabs because it's less data stored, right? But the battle is over, so who cares if your team uses spaces or tabs or all the other things? It's better to fit in with the standard and be consistent than to worry about these little battles that just don't matter. Unless you're Biff and then you like pick a fight over everything and then you get bullshit all over you, right? So that's great. I often feel like people join a team and where they might struggle is not knowing, you join a new company, right? Or a new project or a new team, and you really want to be the star. Your ego is like, I got to kick ass, because otherwise they're going to fire me, or they're not going to like me, or they're going to not respect me. But if you are confused or lost, or you just go down the wrong path for too long and you come back, it's harder to get ahead of the game. So the way you get ahead of the game is you do a bunch of work really quickly to figure out what's difficult or what's challenging. And then you say, hey guys or girls or whoever or whatever on my team, I've been thinking about this. I'm thinking about A, B, or C. What do you all think? And if you do that like at the start, like really early, you look amazing because you're asking a good question early on. But if you kind of avoid talking to people on your team until like the day before the deadline or something, right? Then you look like an idiot because you've gone down this path, you've gone rogue, and no one knows what you're doing or why you're doing it. So the way I view it is like ask really good questions early on to get unstuck. But if you wait too long to ask those questions, then they look like dumb questions. Because, well, why didn't you ask that 2 weeks ago when we first talked about this? Why did you wait until the very end to discuss this controversial path that you took on a project? Okay, everyone's rickrolled. Sorry, had to do it. See if you're awake. If you don't know who rickrolling is, well, Rick Astley was apparently, I was told one time in life, I looked like him. I don't really, but he is the worst musician ever, but he's also the most popular musician ever, probably just because of this song. So anyway, that's a brief digression. So I find another way to be a good engineer is to add value without ego. So like you want to kick ass, but maybe you do it in a way that the team's struggling. So maybe you're that person who comes in and adds some documentation, or maybe you're the person who fixes the broken build, or fixes the test that everyone's been skipping, or maybe you like fix bugs that everyone's been avoiding for 6 months because they don't care, but they need to be fixed, right? So you start adding value in areas that are kind of easy wins for you, but that have kind of annoyed everyone for a while. So when I started working on Slate, the project had roughly 120 open PRs, and I thought that was just terrible, right? And so the email was like, hey, Ian, I've been contributing for a little bit. Do you want some help? And he's like, sure, Dylan, here's the keys. I was like, fuck, well, what do I do with that? He knew who I was, and so he thought, well, this is someone who could actually take over the project. I'm burnt out. But what I did is, within a week, I closed all but like 20 PRs. Like I either landed them or they were no longer relevant. So what I did is I cleaned up the mess of the project that had kind of fallen behind. And no one really wants to sift through old, stale PRs and see which ones are relevant, which ones should be landed, which ones should not. But it was an easy way to like fix the cruft so that then we could like focus on the problems facing us going forward. And so it was a way to add value. And like people didn't know who I was. They're like, well, why did you close my PR? I'm like, well, dude, it's 3 years old and you haven't answered any questions. So like if you really care, like update the PR and then we'll look at it again. And some people did, and some people I've never heard from again, which is great. But you're doing this without ego, and it's really easy when you're like my age to be like, well, I don't care. My ego does not matter. But when you're like young in your career, you really like believe that this code is the best code ever and I'm the most important person ever. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think as you get older, one valuable lesson you can bring to the table is that this is just code that I wrote. It was the best I could do. My ego is not tied to it. If it's wrong, it's okay. If someone feels they need to correct it or work with me on it, that's perfectly fine. Versus when you're younger, you might take offense to this. Well, I'm a terrible engineer. What did I do wrong? Well, no, you just didn't understand the problem, or you didn't have the best solution, or maybe you did just enough that someone else came along and said, oh, now I know how to actually fix this problem and get you unstuck or get you into something better. So you can always add value even if your code isn't the final solution. You're just working towards a problem and trying to make a difference. So this is the famous scene when in Back to the Future 2, when 1985 comes back and suddenly Biff has this casino empire, right? And this is kind of like what React felt like to me at first. It was like everything was different and weird, and there was like a million, like every possible thing you want to do, there's like 50 NPM repos, and they're all of different qualities, and some are maintained and some are not, and you really don't know because the popular ones aren't necessarily the good ones, and the good ones aren't necessarily maintained. And so you're kind of like, what is this shit, But like you get into it and you figure it out and you start to learn how to like pick good dependencies and so forth. And so then question number 4, what's the significance of 1985? So another lesson is patience. A lot of times we think we have to get something done now and immediately, but not everyone works on the same time scale as you. So you need to push, but you also need to be patient and wait for feedback and be deliberate in your actions. It's really easy to hack something together, but it takes longer to make sure that you're actually doing the right thing and that you did it well and the quality was there and met the team's needs. You might even learn patterns, like this hideously patterned Back to the Future sweater that I found. It looks awesome. So there's lots of like things that, when I first learned JavaScript, people scoffed like, we don't have patterns in JavaScript. That's like a thing for those old Java guys, right? Like the Gang of 4 book, please. We would never do any of that in JavaScript. But it turns out there's actually just maybe different patterns or different ways to use those patterns. So there's a question about patterns, which is fun. Yeah. And then I would just say like crazy problems of the past are crazier than most of today's problems. This is Marty drinking brown water in 1885 and being like, how is this water, right? And that was like considered clean and sanitary at the time. And that's a crazy problem because like you're going to get sick from drinking the water. And now today, like you just kind of take for granted that you can drink the tap water in Vienna and everything's going to be fine. You're not going to die from it, right? But there's different problems that are perhaps crazier. So this was that Netscape problem. Oh, it was such a mess, but it was actually an easy fix that I somehow stumbled upon, but back in the day. But sometimes you lose a week of your life just trying to get like a new dependency that has decided to become ESM only and didn't do it right to work with Next and TypeScript in your build system. And you're like, and it turns out it's like a 3-line fix to package JSON that you have to like modify because every package in the world copied the way to do package JSON incorrectly. And you're like, well, this is just my life, right? But it's part of the problem. And you're like, the cable's a foot too short, man. It's just like that. It feels like that pretty regularly. Even the smartest engineers among us run into these problems. So sometimes problems are equal regardless of how experienced you are. And then once you know the solution, it's equally obvious to all of us. But there are certain problems where you don't really know like how difficult the solution is going to be to find. And that's where you got to like speak up and ask and talk to your team and figure things out together. I like to say that if you focus on the use cases you're trying to solve more than necessarily like the right way to do a problem, but like finding a solution that meets the needs of your business is really good. And I say use cases rather than user journeys or other agile terms, because I think a use case really fundamentally forces you to almost think like a test would think, and that you're really describing what it is that you're trying to achieve on the most smallest atomic level possible with extensions and things. And so that's kind of what we focus on. But use cases to me are kind of the ultimate way to like drill down into a particular problem until you can accurately describe what it is you're building and why you're building it. And without like those clearly defined use cases, I find it really difficult to know what does it mean to be done? What does it mean to actually include all the features we want and so forth? So question 6 is the use case founder or the proponent of use cases. So I like to say work hard and smart. So this is Doc Brown wearing a thought computing device. This is me actually wearing a thought computing device, hanging upside down in an aerial yoga swing, wearing a half-stack Vienna shirt from 2019. So I thought that was a pretty funny picture. So the thought computing device I'm wearing is the Neurosity Crown, which actually will read your waves and respond to them. And you can actually train it with words and commands and stuff. It's pretty cool. But it's a lot more, like you can barely see it on my head compared to the one Doc Brown was wearing in 1985. So. And then you can get nice results. So if you do all these things and you persist and you work hard and you work smart and you're not an egotistical jerk and you like actually solve use cases and you fit in with your team and you try to do these things, you can get really nice results like this beautiful Lego set that someone did of the clock tower actually working. But the point is like, there's no magical perfect answer, but you can go back in time or go back to what you once did and maybe even be better at it after you have this experience as a manager. And you have the benefit of just like observing things from a distance and feeling a little less attached necessarily personally to the exact code that's written. And you can focus a bit more on the results, but not so detached that you don't care about the quality of what you're creating and fitting in with your team. So we have this quiz. So anyone who wants to take it should scan that. It'll open a Slido. I think it's called Slido. I don't know. I don't remember the name of the service, but when everyone's phones are down, I'll assume everyone's opened it that wants to play. Everyone in that wants to be in? Anyone waiting? Trying to connect still? This is my first time using it, so it could fail miserably, but we'll try. All right, let's see what happens. So we're going to start this quiz. I think that'll work. So no participant. Oh, I have to actually start it. Sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry. No, I don't. I just have to open it. Let me go back. Okay, there we go. Now people are in. I'll wait a moment for y'all to get in. 22 of you. Oh, these are some fun real names and some are fake. This is good. I like the emoji names. That's the best. V, is that V for Vendetta? I don't know. We'll see. There's two V's, so you might be cheating there. I don't know. All right, is everyone in that wants to be in? Anyone still trying to connect? Raise your hand if you're still connecting. All right, well, David, obviously the designer in the room, is struggling with the QR code scanning. I make fun of David every chance I get. We go way back, so. All right, David, are you in? Okay, now we'll start the quiz. Okay, so what happened in 2015? Half-Stack began, ES6 was released, Marty McFly rides a hoverboard, or all of the above? So 24% of you got the answer, all of the above. I mean, because obviously 1985 was in the movie, right? Okay, next question. What's the significance of 88? The year the flux capacitor was invented, mile per hour to time travel, kilometer per hour to time travel, the year JavaScript was invented, or all of the above? I'm really cool with multiple choice. I give like 3 answers that could almost be right and 1 that is right. So. All right, so time's up. The correct answer was miles per hour to time travel if you believe Back to the Future, obviously. All right, next question. What was the first JavaScript console used in a web browser? Is it Firebug, Chrome DevTools, Web Inspector, Venkman, Microsoft Script Editor, or Microsoft Script Debugger? Ooh, interesting. No one fell for Chrome DevTools. That's so sad. So it was Script Editor just before Script Debugger by like a couple months. I've used all of these, so it's like a good lesson back in time. Pun intended. What led to the changes in 1985 that started Back to the Future 2? Biff Goes Back in Time eliminates George McFly. Biff Goes Back in Time eliminates Bill Gates. Bill Goes Back in Time with the Sports Almanac. Biff Goes Back in Time with an iPhone loaded with the history of the future. Biff steals the DeLorean and strands Marty and Doc Brown in 2015. Okay, so it was the Sports Almanac. And I think the final question, which of these, or no, 2 more questions. Which of these is not a real pattern that could benefit JavaScript developers? CQRS, CORS, event sourcing, module, singleton, or patterns? We don't need anything patterns except YOLO. I gave different amounts of time for the questions based on how difficult I felt they were to read or answer. Okay, time is up. They're actually, I think I was nice enough to say it is CORS. I would accept patterns as well, but I don't think it let me do 2 correct answers, unfortunately. But technically, the answer is CORS. CORS is not really a pattern, it's just a protocol. And the final one, who is the leading proponent of use cases? Is it LivingSpec, Martin Fowler, Brendan Eich, Alistair Colburn, James Gosling, or Atlassian? I see some people are trying to brown nose with the LivingSpec answer. It's great. James Gosling, by the way, is the creator of Java. Brendan Eich is the creator of JavaScript. Martin Fowler is the father of the Agile movement. Alistair Colburn was the person who created the Writing Effective Use Cases book and is considered the champion of that. But I think I also gave LivingSpec as a correct answer, maybe. Let's see. So I gave 2 answers that's correct on that one. So that was super nice of me. Much nicer than I'll be on the real pub quiz tonight. So let's look at this leaderboard. David, you won? How? Well, but his was slightly faster, so he technically beats Michael. But David, I think we should give it to Michael. Yep. So I assume it's you, Michael. Okay. Come claim your prize. Woo.